Hey, it's your pal, Dr. Mike. I'm excited that you've joined the podcast today because this episode is really, really going to be useful. We're talking about resilience, the ability to get through tough stuff and actually come back stronger, come back better. I'm talking to an expert, a clinical psychologist who's developed a program and a way of approaching resilience radically, which is getting to the essence of who we are as a foundation on which we can build our response to stress, difficulty. He teaches this program to teams, he works with individuals, he coaches, and it just is all about making us better. So that's the kind of stuff we talk about here on the podcast, and I'm glad you're here to be part of it.
Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. We're glad you're here. And now our host, Dr. Mike Patterson.
Welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. This is the place where we talk about what it takes to be a great leader and be a builder of great teams. We talk about topics that are relevant to leaders no matter where you are in the organizational structure, whether you're a frontline supervisor in your first managerial position or you've got a corner office in the C-suite. I think there's value for everyone. So I'm glad you've joined us today. And my guest today is Dr. Andy Garrett. Dr. Andy is the world's leading authority on radical resilience. He's a clinical psychologist with over 2 decades of experience working with executive clients in his Newport Beach clinical practice. In addition to his thriving in-person clinical practice, Dr. Andy is a course creator, author, keynote speaker, teaching corporate radical resilience. And that's the focus of our conversation today to top companies around the country. And what I learned after I had invited Andy to be on the show is that he is the grandson of Carl Karcher, the entrepreneur who turned a single hot dog stand into a restaurant chain with 1,000 locations bearing his name. And according to the LA Times, at one time had a personal net worth of over $100 million. Carl was for decades one of the most influential leaders and philanthropists in Orange County, California, and Andy was very close to his grandfather. And so I'm just really curious about that relationship. So we're going to invite Andy to share some of the lessons he learned from his grandfather to be so close, to be so connected with someone so successful. I got to explore that with you, Andy. So Andy,
Awesome.
welcome to the Mission First People Always podcast. I'm glad you're here.
Dr. Mike, grateful to be here. Excited to have this conversation. And as I love talking about my grandpa and the influence that he had on me. So certainly welcome the opportunity to talk about him.
Well, let's start there. What
Okay.
kind of what kind of grandpa was Carl Karcher? I mean, we see the businessman, we see the uh, political mover, shaker, philanthropist, but what kind of man was Carl Karcher?
Yeah, despite all of his success, certainly in the business world and, which was considerable, as you already mentioned, the thing that was most successful about him was just who he was as a person. And he always said that he wasn't in the hamburger business. He was in the people business. He loved people. He loved relationships. You could see it, having a front row seat, whether it was at Angels baseball games, whether it was going out to dinner with him, whether it was, time at family reunions. The way that he interacted with people, he had this amazing ability to make anybody he was talking to feel like they were the most important person in the room. And it was authentic, right? I mean, it wasn't, he really just respected and loved people. He had an incredible capacity to remember names. I've kind of laughed at times as if that's a hereditary thing. It passed, me. And I've realized since that he was so secure in who he was. Unfortunately, there's sometimes when I'm meeting someone, I'm already thinking about what am I going to say next, and
Right.
so I lose the opportunity to really anchor their name and make sure I remember it. He was so secure in who he was, and I think that was something he knew that he just valued. And so people would come up to him at Angels games. We'd be there and they'd say, Carl, you gave me my first job 25 years ago. I'm sure you don't remember me, but I just wanted to say thank you. And he'd know their name and he would say, and
Wow.
remember details sometimes about them. And you could just see the way that made that person feel like really valued. And so those were little things that he did. And grew up in a huge family. So my mom was one of 12. I'm one of, I don't know the exact number, but about 50, grandkids. So family reunions were chaos. I'd love to say organized chaos, but it's probably just chaos. And a lot of times as a clinician, when I hear someone's growing up in that large of a family, the natural conclusion is to think, some people probably really felt ignored, probably, some family dynamics. But again, I think his intentionality and how he connected with everyone, at least I'm not aware of anyone that was the kind of lost child or any of that. All my cousins felt like they had a special relationship with him. I was fortunate, he was really my best friend. The last 10 years of my life, we got extremely close. I got a chance to eulogize him at his funeral, which, had something over 3,000 people that showed up, and we got hundreds of letters from people, some people that met him once, that shared interactions they had that had a massive impact on them. And so, he constantly talked about his core values. You could see the way he organized his time, that he actually lived out the things he talked about. And most people, when they're that successful, they have really giant egos and need to be constantly told how great they are. That wasn't my grandpa at all. When you spent time with him, it was all about you, right? He was constantly pouring in to you. And so he set a model for me of what authenticity looked like. I'd kind of a rough childhood. And so he was the safest person I knew. He was the person that when I was around him, I could stop worrying about, trying to impress or feeling not good enough. I could actually just kind of relax into, I think who I was. And he showed a resilience to me that really the courses I've created are the byproduct of what he modeled, and me just deconstructing. And then from a psychologist kind of engineering, how I would recreate that, not to create more Carl Karchers, but really just to help people to create their version of, that level of clarity and what you stand for, that level of resilience and what's possible when you start to operate from that space.
So what a wonderful role model to have, what a legacy to have apart from, the success and the restaurant chain. You had a grandpa that cared for you and made you feel special, and it sounds like that was the way he treated everyone. So I love that, and some of the lessons you learned from your grandfather really laid the foundation for your ideas around radical resilience. And you've created a course. And, we got to chatting before we hit record for the podcast. And I kind of got sucked into everything you're doing. And I'm excited to, explore this with the audience. What are some of the basic concepts behind True North Radical Resilience, the corporate course you've developed and you offer through your organization, and you've delivered this to many organizations successfully. You're seeing a big impact there. What inspired it? What's behind it? What's the focus of the workshop? What are you doing that people are so excited about?
Yeah, I think it really started working with a business coach several years back. Had a good private practice that was doing really well. Working mostly with executives, people who were, very successful, ambitious, driven. They had all the external markers of success. They were making all the money that they could possibly want, buying multiple homes, going on incredible vacations, buying yachts, but their identity was completely attached to their income, their positions, their job. And that wasn't fulfilling. The more that they achieved, the more they accumulated, they felt, oftentimes more empty, and they would leave a trail of broken relationships. So I recognized the ability to answer the question, who am I? And to have a clear understanding of identity that is holistic in nature, right? It's not just, I know who I am as a businessman or businesswoman, but I know who I am, and it translates very easily into any room I'm in, the boardroom, the bedroom, church, the elder room, or whatever it might be. And so, again, looking to some of the example my grandpa set, starting with defining those 5 core values, but, really not just saying, here's 5 words. How well can you be able to answer, does those values mean to you? Why are they important? How do you actually apply them in your day-to-day life? So working with that business coach, he started asking, how are you going to scale, right? How do you want to grow? There's a lot of the traditional model of growing a practice, just taking on a bunch of coaches or therapists that work under you. I knew I didn't want to go that model. That looked like a big headache to me. So I ended up creating a course, and it kind of brought back old grad school days when we would get a vignette and have to come up with some type of treatment plan. I've always loved coming up with really creative ways of addressing psychological challenges and borrowing from different theoretical orientations and models from different disciplines. And I remember oftentimes our teachers saying, this is really fascinating perspective of how you brought these different, kind of ideas together. So that's what I did. We brought in things from self-determination theory to positive psychology to sports psychology, and to answer originally that question, who am I? So that people, I feel like when you have clarity on that, it's amazing how everything else gets so much easier. So we built a course. I'll try and come to the conclusion here. But I built a course based off of working with that business coach. We launched it in beta mode on March 15th of 2020. If you know your timeline at all, that's right when the state of California, really the whole US went on shut down COVID. We had 25 people committed to going through that course. A few people understandably said, I'm going to opt out. I'm a little, kind of freaked out by what's going on. But 18 people stayed committed. 14 of those people completed the program. Those 14 people thrived in the midst of one of the most uncertain times, certainly in my life. And it was because they were standing on this bedrock of clarity, of conviction. And so it enabled them a lot of times, even in their business, to pivot. It allowed them, when you have security in who you are, it's like you trust yourself, you feel safe, right, within yourself. You trust yourself to, I think, handle difficult things. So it created an organic sense of resilience. But where we added the resilience piece to it is that even though these people were often, having major breakthroughs in their business, in their marriages, reconciling sometimes broken relationships with family members, really was exciting and amazing, but doesn't stop life from happening, right? And then we went on to experience some economic turbulence. There's all kinds of chaos happening in the world. Some of these people had significant health issues. So we thought, all right, we've defined for people clearly where their true north is. And when they're heading in that direction, they are on fire. They're in flow state, but things in life can knock them off course. The ability to quickly respond to that and learn from it and come back stronger, that's resilience, right? So you get off course even a degree or two over a long enough period of time, that can be catastrophic, right? You can end up with a business, that ends up bankrupt or in lawsuits. You end up a degree or two off course in your marriage, and it can end up in divorce. So that ability to quickly rebound and get back on track, we realized if we could help people to create resilience practices that reinforced their true north, that would be, we believe that would be powerful. Implementing it, we saw that it was even more powerful than I guessed. And I had a bunch of clients that own businesses that said, hey, we have consultants, we have people we pay. I love what you're doing. Would you please come in and be willing to work with my team? So we created a corporate model, and it's just had a massive impact. And it's, organically started to grow where we have a ton of interest in it right now. The benefits of it have really been the stories that we get. Because when you help someone to define who am I and help them to practice resilience, that's not just applicable in the workplace. These are skill sets that really translate into all areas of life. And so while managers are now leading their teams to record profits, and we're seeing these great breakthrough stories, we're also hearing it in their marriage and in their health, which the CEOs that I work with love.
Resilience to me, and this may be a simplistic definition from a clinical perspective or from a scholarly perspective, but resilience is just, in my mind, this ability to navigate through hard stuff and keep going.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of hard stuff in life that comes at us. Your course is called Radical Resilience, or your approach is called Radical Resilience. What's the radical part?
Yeah, I love it. I feel like radical is one of those words that has taken on a kind of a negative connotation, because a lot of times it gets attached to things like radical political ideology. But if you actually look at the definition of the word radical, it means to get to the fundamental root or essence or core of something. So when you attach resilience to the identity of an organization or the identity of an individual, that's where it becomes radical, right? Is all of a sudden they're operating out of that core essence of what matters most to them, They're operating out of their core strengths with a sense of purpose. And so that resilience becomes part of the fundamental essence of who they are. And I love, as you said, the resilience. My daughter actually got a resilience journal, right? Hopefully she doesn't resent me, what she had told her. But there was an example in there of dropping an egg versus dropping a bouncy ball, right? The egg drops and it cracks. That's fragility. The bouncy ball bounce backs up. That's the idea of resilience. We try and say, like, I don't know if anybody ever bought those super bouncy balls. Sometimes you get those little quarter machines. If you don't catch it on the first bounce, it's like it picks up steam, like it gets more bouncy. That's the idea of radical resilience, is we don't want you to just bounce back up, and we don't want to increase just your capacity for dealing with hard things. We want you to actually learn from each, rejection, setback, failure, and be able to respond to that with a renewed sense of, getting stronger, better, wiser through adversity. And really, that's what we often do anyways, but we just wanted to speed up the timeline in which that happens. How can you do that more efficiently and with agility? Believing that way you can spend more time growing, succeeding, right? Spending more time winning.
How does authenticity and self-awareness play into this? And I see the connection for individuals, but you've taken this into the corporate environment where teams are trying to figure out how to become more resilient, because
Yeah.
business throws a lot of challenges at us. Markets change, new competitors show up, technology becomes obsolete, and you've got to pivot. So, how does a team identify sort of who they are, what's true about us? How does it work in that team environment?
Yeah, that's the challenge. And we do hear a lot of times companies that have created, really great. They've got their core values listed. They've got their mission statement. They got those things, but sometimes it doesn't relate, right? Because then connecting it to the individual, hopefully they do a great job of hiring on the front end, right? And they're making sure that there's alignment there. As you probably know, a lot of companies don't do a particularly great job of that. Some do. I think a great example, organization that I think does this is the Navy SEALs. The Navy SEALs have really clearly defined, what they're all about, what their core values are, their core mission. It's all about this kind of brotherhood and this sense of collaboration and teamwork. And so when they're recruiting, they're making sure they're looking for people that have character strengths that align with that, right? They're not looking for the biggest, baddest guys, the ones that look like they can kick the most butt. But they want people that come in that have integrity, loyalty, right? That are great, teamwork. And then they've created, a whole training program that helps to train and reinforce these core values and character strengths. Bottom line, and then they have, stories that they share that reinforce this notion. They've got, little slogans that they, no man left behind. Everything keeps coming back to their true norms, right? How they recruit, how they train, who they promote. And so that's the idea, is that once you are able to create that alignment. So if a company has a certain set of core values, we run the individuals through, a core values exercise. It might be that their personal core values don't perfectly align with the company's. That might be slightly different. We want to help them be able to match. For instance, to say real quick, we had a guy who is the CEO of a company, and one of their core values that they created was all about health, right? They had this whole initiative. They wanted to promote people taking better care of themselves. Part of it was he had a heart issue. His wife and his co-founder and his cardiologist best friend were like, you need to take this serious. But when I had the CEO do his personal core values, I could tell health, he didn't care about it, right? He was trying to wedge it in and make it something that he valued. There was no emotion behind it, but he identified trust as his number one core value, right? And you could tell, I mean, he got emotional about it. He had stories he could tell. So then I helped him to realize that he was undermining the trust of his team and of his wife, because he was smoking on breaks. He was eating junk food all the time. It was undermining the resilience of his team because they saw hypocrisy. But when he realized he was breaking trust, it helped to bridge that gap. He was able to anchor his behavioral change, right, to something that really mattered to him, so that he did start to take care of his health. And now all of a sudden we created authenticity and congruency, and it had a massive impact on the entire team when he was able to make that alignment between what he valued and what the organization was promoting.
Again, talking about the course you offer your corporate clients, and I understand you also work individually with executives through coaching. But I'm interested in sort of the structure of your program, the way it's organized. I think it probably is based on a few key pillars.
Yeah.
What are those pillars of the Radical Resilience program, the True North Resilience program, and how do they get played out in practice? I'm always focused on how does this work in real life because people that have doctor in front of their name tend to sometimes not live in the real world. So,
Very true.
how do we help people who live in the real world, work with real people, have to deal with real problems, apply these ideas through, in your case, three pillars?
Yeah. So the three pillars, and I've used the example of kind of rowing a boat, of the three mistakes or the three things that I see individuals and companies do that undermine resilience, and how these pillars address those. So the first one is having a clear and consistent direction that you're heading. That's a true north, right? So it's all about establishing those set of core values, the mission, guiding principles, that effectively help define decision making. Ideally, help promote, who you promote, who you hire. If you've rowed a boat and you've ever had, where maybe if you're rowing by yourself, you're rowing one arm in one direction, but the other arm's going in the opposite direction, which a lot of people live in compartmentalized, right? It's like, maybe in business, their values and the way they operate is this way, but it doesn't at all translate home. It doesn't translate into other areas. And so you feel like you're putting a lot of effort, but ultimately you're not yet. You're going around in circles.
Yeah.
Same thing on your leadership team, right? If you have, I've seen this over and over again. If you got one leader that's saying one thing, you got another one that's undermining it because they've got a completely different, and there's no clear structure on how this all works. It creates absolute chaos, right? And you have a team now that instead of being able to operate at their highest capability, they're scrambling. They're often in, just survival mode, and it significantly undermines. So when we help to establish that true north, create consistency of direction, it creates what we call the 5 C's: clarity, consistency, cohesiveness, conviction, and confidence. And when you have the basis for that, well, now you're ready to supercharge, right? Now you're ready to consistently row in a direction. And it's amazing how much further you get and how much more enjoyable that will be. So
Yeah, I had a friend recently who is the general manager of a business owned by three very talented, successful partners. Um, but he was sharing with me the partners seem to be out of sync, and over time, this inconsistency about where we're taking the business became more and more apparent, and it started to affect business operations in a major way. It affected morale. It affected their ability to retain talent.
yeah,
The confusion about who's doing what, when, why, where, who's in charge of what. It just became very frustrating, and so he spoke to the need for clarity, and actually has been working very hard to get the owners on the same page. So I think that's kind of an example of what you're talking about here when we don't have it.
yeah. That's a great example of that. And I think it was a survey on LinkedIn that had 10,000 respondents. They were asking what's the most frustrating kind of management, I remember it was mistake, but communication style. And effectively it was inconsistency and confusion, right?
Yeah.
When it increases that sense of, we need clarity to operate at our best. And when you introduce chaos, it will undermine your ability to grow, certainly to be resilient. So that you start with there, right? That really needs to be the first pillar, because then it helps to define everything we do from there. The second pillar, if again, we're using the rowing analogy, we don't want to actually always want to have to rely on resilience or willpower. Willpower is kind of like a gas tank, right? You can dip into it, but when you use it, it kind of depletes and you need to recharge it again. And so that notion of always rowing against the flow of the river or against the tide versus we believe that there are ways to go with the flow. And there's a pathway to success that's more naturally resilient. and that's more sustainable and that just is more efficient. So that's tapping into the mindset that you have, mindset around stress, growth mindset, things that when you create that type of mindset, we know that it turns stress into something that can actually be fuel for motivation, right? There's the great work from Dr. Kelly McGonigal on the upside of stress, where they found that the belief that you have around stress is actually what dictated how stress actually affected you. And so there's exercises you can do that help people to really transform their relationship to stress. And it's massively impactful. So motivation, right? We help, it's the difference between extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation. Extrinsic motivation, well, certainly you do need to get paid a certain amount. But if that's the primary motivator, and that's what's talked about all the time in the workplace, it becomes increasingly more expensive. It becomes really unsustainable and corrosive over time. And so if you can at least help your team to identify what they are intrinsically motivated to do in the roles that they're at, that's like tapping into clean energy. It's amazing when people start to operate from that space. You will find that they perform better, get more productivity, and less likelihood of burnout. It's a great trade-off, right? Where you're going to get better performance with a significantly reduced likelihood of burnout or, kind of some of the absenteeism, stress-related illness.
Yeah, I think Daniel Pink's book, Drive,
Amazing.
speaks to that really well. And I love the metaphor you used just now, tapping into clean energy, because extrinsic motivation is depletable.
Yeah.
It's going to run out at some point. We don't have enough carrots to dangle in front of people, and people don't respond to sticks maybe in the way we used them in the past. And so we got to tap into something that's undeniable and ever present. So I love that idea. Give us your final pillar, and then
Yeah.
I want to ask about something that's I've been curious about, since I started prepping for this.
Awesome.
What is your final and third pillar of your program?
It's just really how to maximize, optimize your physiology of resilience. And that's, if you're rowing a boat, all of us have different body builds and different, strengths. So you're just optimizing, who you are and your particular strengths. Also, whether it's sleep, diet, exercise. Well, we don't necessarily go deep into those. We do have resources that we help people tap into. And, we really encourage, we see a lot of times people we work with that don't get nearly enough sleep, that don't exercise. And so, that is a part. The thing that's really cool is where we tap into sports psychology is introducing things like active recovery techniques that people can do on a daily basis, spend 10 minutes, right? In sports psychology, athletes that did this in match, it was the difference between those that had consistently won championships versus those that didn't. They were able to recover in real time. So as the match went on, like in tennis, or that's where I actually read the study originally, they continued to play at a high or got better as the match went on, whereas their opponents would start to give into fatigue. They'd start to make more mistakes. And so, doing 10, 15 minutes of active recovery will completely recharge your batteries to perform better at the second half of the day. And it significantly reduces the likelihood of experiencing, again, burnout, kind of that sense of being disengaged from your work.
What's a simple example of active recovery? Because I think I might need it for my golf game.
I think one of the most powerful things we do, so we teach breathing techniques, but highly customized, specific, depending on how stress is affecting you. If you're anxious and you need to really hit the brakes on your nervous system, there's one particular breathing mechanism that's very effective, right? At being able to engage your parasympathetic nervous system. That's a nerdy term, right? For just being able to relax, slow your heart rate down and kind of recenter. If you're stressed but exhausted, right? It's a different breathing technique that you actually need to ramp up your heart rate and increase your motivation. And there's a breathing technique that we teach that intentionally induces like a moderate level of stress so that we can teach people how to operate at a really high level in a stress state, which is kind of a superpower, right? And so doing that, the ability to address with some breathing technique and some mindfulness. And then, we do some affirmations too of helping people to then, say an affirmation that's something they believe, that they have conviction in, that's authentic. it's amazing. There's all kinds of research, right? When you affirm things that you know to be true, it really puts you into one of the most powerful psychological states that you can be in. So now you're ready to re-enter your work really with conviction and power.
Here's what I've been anxious to talk about, because I'm just super curious. You talk about cows and buffalo, um, and when we encounter when those animals encounter storms, they respond differently. I sense that this is some sort of metaphor for how we as humans can respond more effectively to the storms of life, the challenges of life. Tell us what you mean by the cow and buffalo.
Yeah. Yeah. And you nailed it. So apparently when storms come, as cows sense that their natural inclination is to try and avoid it, trying to run from it. They, of course, are not the fleetest of hoof. So the storm catches up to them. And in their desire to avoid, they end up spending the maximum amount of time in the storm. Buffalo, on the other hand, they naturally come together as a herd, right, to protect the young and to recognize that they're stronger in numbers. But then they immediately start to run into the storm. And because of that, they get through it in the most efficient way possible. And they spend the maximum amount of time in the good weather. And while that story alone, I think, is something, right? People often, I'm going to be a buffalo. What makes you a buffalo is the self-awareness, right? And having a strategy in place that you know exactly, what you're equipped with to get through the storm. And we've seen this. We had just a quick story. A manager that had worked with a company for 15 years, right? Worked himself up to his dream position and was a great performer, but conflict avoidant, hated conflict. And he had an employee that worked with him that was, rebellious and difficult. He had actually written out a resignation letter. He was ready to quit because it was causing him so much stress. His owner, his boss said, "Hey, we just invested in this radical resilience training. We at least go through that and see how it, how if it helps." So we did that. 3 months later, that employee does something that got back to the boss. He called up the manager and said, are you okay? Am I going to get another resignation letter? And that guy said, "No, I'm a buffalo. I just didn't know it. Now I know what makes me a buffalo." He handled the situation immediately in a way that was consistent with his values. He had to let the employee go, but he's also led that company to massive breakthroughs. He's had all kinds of significant breakthroughs because now he's not afraid, right? Avoidance is one of the worst things that we can do, kicking the can down the road. And yet it's one of the most consistent things I see with managers, or heading into it like a bull in a china shop. That also not effective most times. So going into it with a clear strategy, right, of what empowers you and your team to get through difficult moments is really incredible.
So, a couple of points here, and then a follow-up question. It sounds like community is really important too, and maybe I'm, really excited about the buffalo, metaphor here. But so the buffalo gathers together in as a herd, protects the young, moves together. How important is community when difficult times come? Being with others who are experiencing the same things, but we're somehow stronger together. How does that work?
Absolutely critical. I think there's fascinating research on the effects of stress and how you experience it in isolation versus in community. Also coming from Dr. Kelly McGonigal out of Stanford, that she referenced when people were stressed. And a lot of times people's tendency is when you're stressed is to push people away. I just need to figure this out on my own. But we know when you do that, it actually constricts the blood vessels in your heart, which is not particularly good for heart health over a period of time.
Right.
On the other hand, when you're stressed and then you have support, someone reaches out, you feel that sense of connection, it releases oxytocin, which then dilates the blood vessels in the heart, which is really good for heart health. So it literally transforms the cardiovascular effect of stress. We know too that just when you feel support, you're more hopeful. Hope is a huge part of resilience. The belief that, while this might stink right now, right, I know it can and will get better. And so it's critical. One of the things that we do that I think adds the radical component to support system is it's great to have a structure in place, right? This is who you reach out to, or these are the people on speed dial when I'm going through tough times. But we try and make it more self-aware is what specific roles and strengths do people have? Ideally, you have a support system that maybe has someone who's great at bringing levity and humor, right? That sometimes you need that. You have the mentor type, you have the empath, you have the encourager, and knowing what you need, right? Like if I try and go to my friend who's great at making me laugh and expect for him to be empathic, he sucks at that. I'm going to go to that encounter. I'm going to be frustrated at the end of it. I'm not going to be more resilient. We're both going to be frustrated. So bringing some sense of awareness and then knowing, what role you play that helps increase the resilience of the people in your circle, I think just helps to really make it even more powerful and effective, make you more of a buffalo.
So we started our conversation, Andy, with your grandfather, Carl Karcher, and as we're talking about resilience and getting through tough times, and how he taught you so much about this. Carl went through some tough stuff in his
Yeah.
career. I mean, it always he was very successful, but he also had went through some storms. We don't need to relive the controversies, but he was a guy that had to deal with some tough stuff. How did he do that, and how did that, inform your thinking about being a buffalo?
Yeah, it's a great question. And arguably, despite all of his, remarkable success, maybe one of the times that he had the biggest impact on me was when he was going through one of the most difficult seasons of his life, right? He had lost my aunt to an unfortunate, reaction to surgery. His brother, who was the president of Carl's, had died of cancer. So he's grieving. In the midst of that, he had some heart issues and then got fired ultimately while he was kind of distracted dealing with some of the stuff from his own board. So, any one of those things would be substantially stressful and understandable if it was difficult to be around a person like that during that time. Right. But he had all those things kind of happen in a short period of time. If you were around him during that time, you would have no idea he was going through that. Right. That's part of that sense of consistency of knowing your true north. And it really helps people when you operate with consistency, right? It really is the basis for establishing trust. And it's where people, when you trust someone, it's like your guard goes down. Now you can enter your prefrontal cortex where you can start to really, strategize and focus on growing. So I saw the way he responded to all that adversity. It happened to coincide with the time in my life. I was about 20 at that time. And I, was kind of self-destructive as a teenager and was bottoming out. And I really needed to make some significant changes in my life. Watching how my grandpa was able to rebound and watching how he responded to that, that resilience became contagious. And so I
Mm.
was able to borrow from it. And I recognized with good leadership, right? People are watching how you respond to adversity. And if you're quick to blame others or you're quick to avoid it, that the downhill trickle effect of that is everyone's going to recognize we're not in good hands. Every man or woman for themselves, as opposed to when you know that you're in the presence of a strong leader and someone that's like, we got this. It's amazing how it will bolster everybody, right? It does become contagious and people will rise up and kind of deliver in ways that they're not probably not even always aware that they're capable of. And so, watching him had a massive impact. Watching how he did it or how I believe he did it is also informs the importance of knowing that true north, right? And how anchoring your resilience to that really is a critical piece and something that I don't see in some of the other resilience programs out there, right? Wonderful programs, really amazing programs. But I think if you're not anchoring it to that understanding of true north, I do think it's ultimately not going to be as powerful or as sustainable.
We're talking to Dr. Andy Garrett, a Newport Beach based clinical psychologist, but also the developer of a very powerful course called True North Radical Resilience. We've been talking through the key ideas from this course and how they were informed by his relationship with his grandfather, the very successful businessman Carl Karcher. Um, Andy, we've chatted for quite a while now, and you've said a lot. But it's my custom on the podcast to really end every episode with an invitation to my guest to give the audience a piece of very practical advice. And so I'll do the same with you. What's something that our listeners can take away from our conversation today and begin applying right away? Maybe it's a resilience practice, I know there are many you teach, but
Yeah.
maybe what's your favorite? What's the most the easiest to apply? Give us something to take home and put into practice right away.
I'm going to reference my favorite personal development book, and the quote in there that is my favorite personal development quote comes from Viktor Frankl, the incredible book, Man's Search for Meaning. Incredible read, not exactly a light read, but he says there's a line in there. He says, between what happens to us and our response, there's a space. And in that space is where our capacity for growth and freedom exists. Oftentimes when we're stressed or we're angry, or, we get triggered by an emotion or something that happens, we don't pause. We don't take the time to create space in how we respond. And in doing that, we give away our capacity for growth and freedom. So that ability to sometimes just recognize, I don't always have to respond right away. How can I create mechanisms or something that allows me to create just enough space in between my response that enables me to formulate, right? Or at least access my resilience. That's been a game changer for so many of clients that I've worked with and businesses. If you start getting good at pausing before you respond, I promise you, it will save you unnecessary arguments with your wife. It will save you from saying things to, your employees or teammates that you can't take back. It's a real game changer.
Yeah, how do we make the most of that space? I love that quote from Frankel as well. Incredibly powerful. How do we make the most of that space? How do we expand that space? An incredibly valuable idea. So, Andy, I just want to thank you so much for being a great guest on the Mission First People Always podcast. We think a lot alike, and I'm excited to encourage people to connect with you. We've got all of your contact information, your website,
Awesome.
everything they would need to track you down and explore this program that you're offering the world through your company, AG Thrive. So, just thanks for being a great guest. Hope to have you back at some point and hear more about radical resilience. To my audience, you're awesome. Thanks for listening from wherever you are in the world. We've got people that listen from Asia, from Europe, from across the United States. I'm so grateful for all of you. My goal with this podcast and all of the work I do is to help you bring your best self to work every day and equip you to bring out the best in the people around you. Effective leaders balance performance and people because the two always go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. So I hope that our conversation today will help you be a better leader, better teammate, and better human being. And if you like what we're doing here, please follow or subscribe, leave a review, tell a friend. And if I can be of service to you or your organization, or if you want an easy way to access our back catalog of episodes, please check out my website, drmikepatterson.com. So until next time, take care of yourself and take care of your team.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to create a strong, more people-centric and empowered culture for your organization, visit drmikepatterson.com.